Hello everyone, my name's Liang. I'm 40, I live in Camden in North London, and here's my audition tape for Flight Club. I had built up a career in financial services, primarily in a sales and marketing capacity. And when the crash came, I decided to broaden my horizons and do a lot of other things that I've always wanted to do. So I have since founded my own company, Eureka Languages, which is to do with the learning of foreign languages. I speak 10 languages at the moment and counting. I'm always learning another foreign language. And on top of that, I also teach gymnastics because I'm a former national champion gymnast. And it was something that brought me a lot of joy, and I've decided to revisit it. So I'm still training gymnastics and coaching a lot of gymnastics. I'm also an actor, and I am a prolific YouTuber. I love making YouTube videos. So when I'm not working, I usually would be in the gym teaching, coaching, or training. Or I will be doing this, sitting down in front of my laptop and making a video for YouTube. It's hard to pick a favorite holiday, but one of the best experiences I've had was when I visited Tunisia 2 years ago, and that's before the horrific terrorist attacks of last year. Back then, Tunisia was considered a relatively safe and stable North African country where foreigners like myself can travel around in relative safety, and I had a wonderful time because I managed to get hold of this carte bleu, which is, if you like, a travel card for unlimited travel on Tunisian railways for something silly like 13 or 14 pounds sterling. So armed with my carte bleu, I was able to explore the length and the breadth of Tunisia. And a lot of tourists who go to Tunisia would never dream about doing something like that. They would only stay in their five-star hotels or resorts, and they would get on these air-conditioned buses where they would have a guide who would drive them from tourist attraction to tourist attraction, and they would never ever speak to a local or venture out into the streets on their own. And they stay in their own little tourist bubble, and I did the complete opposite. Yes, I stayed in a very nice hotel, but with my carte bleu, I got on the trains with the locals, and there are some pretty long train journeys in the country as big as Tunisia, and people would stare at me, admittedly, because in a country like Tunisia, foreigners are pretty rare, especially East Asian, Chinese-looking foreigners like myself. So if a white person were to turn up in Tunisia, they wouldn't really bat an eyelid, a black person. But there are so few East Asian people there. So when I'm sitting on the train, people would stare at me. I mean, especially the children or even the adults. They would look at me, they would talk about me, and little do they know that I am absolutely, totally fluent in French because I studied at a French university. I've worked for Google France and Paris, so my French is as fluent as my English. And I can understand practically everything they say because I've also lived in Dubai and I speak some Arabic, far from fluent, but enough for me to figure things out. And I've also made a genuine effort to learn the local Tunisian dialect of Arabic. So when people started talking about me, I would just turn around and say Aslama, would greet them in their local dialect. And that led to a lot of actually really interesting conversations because they really wanted to know who I am, what I was doing in Tunisia, what brought me to Tunisia, what I thought about their country. Then they also wanted to know why I'm able to speak French or Arabic. And this really created such a rich experience because a lot of these conversations took place on train platforms. Now, if you've ever tried taking a train in Tunisia, be prepared to wait and wait and wait and wait some more because the trains are always subject to delays. And so I remember being stuck on the railway platform in Sousse, waiting about 2.5 hours for a train that nobody knew when it was going to turn up. And I just ended up speaking to so many people, so many local Tunisians. Those 2.5 hours just flew by because I had the most fascinating conversations. I made friends and the locals were very helpful, very friendly. And that for me was really the kind of memorable experience I really want to have when I'm on holiday. As for my worst holiday experience, well, there are two that come to mind. One is in Indonesia, where I was involved in a horrific car accident outside Borobudur. And then there is the nasty, horrible week in Greece, when I was in Corfu for a week on a package holiday. Since the car accident in Indonesia was probably a one-off, I would prefer to talk about the holiday experience in Greece, which could happen to anyone and everyone. So here's the disclaimer. I love Greece. I have been to Greece many times before. I love the Greek islands. I basically found myself a last-minute deal online, and I managed to get myself a really cheap flights plus a week's accommodation in Corfu for very little money. So I thought, okay, for that kind of money, what do I have to lose? What could go wrong? Well, apparently a lot of people who thought the same way would end up in such resorts in places like Greece and Spain, and we are talking about the very worst of British tourists. Now, I don't believe they would behave that badly where they live and work in the UK, but give them a bit of sun and place them on a Greek island, and they go berserk. They were absolutely horrendous, to be unbelievable. The amount of loud, ugly behavior I observed from the English tourists. We're talking about English people being super obnoxious, being drunk in the middle of the day, being very rude to the Greek locals, being rude and nasty to other tourists, to each other, and it was the very worst of English scum from the very nastiest council estates that you could imagine. Now, if you take all of those people and put them on the Greek island, now that was the kind of people I had the misfortune of coming across and staying next to. Because at 3 o'clock in the morning or at 4 o'clock in the morning, they would roll in from the pubs drunk and they would wake everyone up in the resorts because they were singing, they were shouting, they didn't care whom they disturbed. I was so sick and tired of that kind of ugly British tourist behavior that towards the end of that week, I swear I was walking everywhere in Corfu speaking only in French, refusing to say a word of English because I didn't want people to think that I was British. I did not want to be associated with that kind of ugly British English tourists who were just vile, so nasty and vile. As for my idea of a hellish holiday, I think I've already described what I dislike and what I would go out of my way to avoid. I'm sorry if it sounds discriminatory, but there is a certain kind of British tourist that you really should go out of your way to avoid. Now, it's not just British tourists. I'm sure every country in the world, from America to France to Russia to China to Australia, would produce a certain kind of nasty, working class, uncouth, very badly behaved tourists who would go out of their way to ruin things for everybody else. If you have the misfortune of having to spend any amount of time with them, say on the cruise or in a hotel, then all I can say is good luck to you. In particular, I really reserve a special kind of disdain for British tourists who go abroad and refuse to speak a word of the language of the country they are visiting. That's why I think the French have got it absolutely right when they refuse to speak any English with the British or the American tourists who don't speak any French. And I think the rest of the world should do the same thing. Stop speaking English to these people. As for the kinds of things that I like doing on holiday, now firstly, I love winter sports. I go skiing a few times a year whenever I can. Apart from that, I really love my European city breaks, long weekends on the continent. So I particularly enjoy the Airbnb experience where I get to stay with a local host. So the kind of social interactions I have with the hosts is actually really rewarding. And sometimes you become really good friends and sometimes it's just quite formal and polite. But either way, it's a much better experience than the kind of very formal interaction you have with, say, the staff at a hotel. And of course, I love sampling the local cuisine. I'm really quite adventurous in terms of trying anything. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. When in Rome, eat what the Romans eat. As for the kind of people I like to go away on holiday with, I think first and foremost they have to be considerate. So for example, when I need to sleep, when I'm tired, they say, okay, fine, I'm going to have an early night, I'm not going to disturb you, you need your 7 or 8 hours of sleep, and they're not going to roll in from the bar or the nightclub at 2 o'clock in the morning and wake me up knowing that I am already exhausted from the previous day. Now, people have done that to me before, and it really, really irks me. And secondly, I'm teetotal. I don't touch a molecule of alcohol, and that is simply a matter of choice. I don't like the effect that alcohol has on my body, so even though I am completely British, I don't get British drinking culture at all. So when I go out on holiday, drinking forms no part of my holiday whatsoever. So really, I think it's quite difficult for me to go on holiday with you if your idea of a holiday is to go to the bar and get horrifically drunk, and if you think, well, that's your idea of fun, then I also find myself getting quite irked with people who do not make any effort to speak the local language. When on holiday, I went to Romania with my friend Simon to go skiing in Poiana Brașov. Now, we were staying in the small town of Brașov. We are talking about a really, really small town in Transylvania, in Romania, where very, very few people spoke any English at all. And he made very little effort to speak any Romanian with anyone because he said, well, I don't speak Romanian, so what am I going to do? Just not speak to anyone anywhere. And because I had spent weeks studying Romanian, and because I speak French, Italian, and Spanish as well as another Latin-based Romance language, I can actually figure out Romanian fairly well. So I do have a basic grasp of Romanian. So my Romanian is good enough for me to have a conversation in Romanian with a Romanian person who didn't speak a word of English. So for me, it's like, yeah, of course I expect you to learn Romanian and speak Romanian when in Romania. You're in their country, you jolly well speak their language. How dare you speak English when in Romania? And for him, it was like, what the hell are you going on about? And come to think of it, I do have a great friend, his name's Kai, he's from Finland, and like me, he is a hyperglot, so he speaks 10 languages as well, and we don't speak the same 10 languages. So I think between the two of us, we probably have about 16 or 17 languages. So I'm sure he's the kind of person I like to go traveling around the world with, because between the two of us, we have had most countries covered. As for my dream holiday destination, oh, there's only one place in the world, and that's Patagonia in Argentina, for one very, very special reason. It's the only place outside the UK which is Welsh speaking. Now, as a fluent Welsh speaker, it's always been a place that has fascinated me about how a group of pilgrims have left Wales in search of the promised land where they can continue to speak Welsh and not be forced to speak English and not be forced to assimilate. Until today, there is a small Welsh-speaking community who have successfully preserved and sustained their Welsh language and heritage. And so, given that I speak both Spanish and Welsh fluently, it's the one place in the world, from a linguistic point of view, that I think I would find thoroughly amazing to be there and to speak Welsh and Spanish at the same time and having nobody speak a word of English for a radius about 500 miles. That to me sounds like an ideal holiday. As for why I would like to be a part of Flight Club, I'm a huge fan of an American TV program called The Amazing Race, and until there is going to be a British version, I'm not holding my breath, I think this is probably the closest thing that will get to The Amazing Race for a British person like myself to take part in. Now, the ideal contestant in The Amazing Race would be someone who speaks many, many different languages and someone who's very well traveled and has been to a lot of countries all over the world. Now, I speak 10 languages and counting, and I have been to a total of 52 countries and counting. So, I think I would be ideal for Flight Club. So let's see. I'm always up for a challenge, and I hope you guys like what you saw in my audition video. Thank you very much, and hope to see you guys soon. Bye.